Welcome to the Writing 1 presentation, How to Use Research in a College Writing Paper. Please follow along with this presentation in both books that you are using, How to Write Anything, and we'll look at chapters 42 through 44. And also please have out your pocket style manual. We'll be looking at some pages. You can see them listed on the screen. When you go to use research in your paper, you really have three options: summarizing, paraphrasing, or quoting. And you can see here that there are different chapters dedicated to those within our How to Write Anything books. When we integrate sources into our papers, then we need to go through a few different steps to make sure we're doing it well. And the situations are going to be different from paper to paper, and even within your paper you might do these in different ways. But usually if you try to do these three things, I call them the three I's, it's really going to help. First is you're going to introduce the source. That includes introducing the author's name if you need to, especially if it hasn't been in your paper yet. The author's credibility and credentials, again, you only need to do that the first time that you introduce the article. And you can maybe include the publication or article name where that information first appeared. And then once you've introduced the author and all those other things the first time that you use a source, then you can include the paraphrase or the quote that you want to use. We'll look at some more specific ways and practice doing that later. But then after you bring in that quotation or that paraphrase, you don't just drop it. You don't just leave it in there. You want to interpret or explain and discuss the source's ideas. That'll help show how they support your point and apply to the ideas and the subjects in your paper. We don't just bring in sources because we're required to do so. We bring in our sources to help support our ideas. And that's the important reason that we have for using all this research, all these sources. We don't want to forget that. So we want to include all that interpretation, explanation, discussion, and so on after we use our source. When you choose to use quotations, it's important to use them appropriately. And you don't want to just have tons and tons and tons of quotations in your paper. You want to stay focused around your own ideas. In a pocket style manual, they have a really great list of when to use quotations, and we're going to go down through it here for a moment. First, use quotations when language is especially vivid or expressive. When the way that the author says it is so much more lovely than the way that you could say it. When the author says something so powerfully, there's no way you could replicate it. You just need those exact words. That's when you want to use it. You want to use when exact wording is needed for technical accuracy. So you don't want people to get things wrong. If you're explaining how to do something, you want to use the exact words. You also use quotations when it's important to let the debaters of an issue explain their positions in their own words. You can use quotations when the words of an authority lend weight to an argument, and when the language of a source is the topic of your discussion. So if you're analyzing or interpreting words, you definitely want to use those exact words in order to analyze and interpret them. Primarily, though, you're using quotations to support your ideas. So you're using them just as needed to support your ideas. You want to avoid dropped quotes, and you can see what that means on page 382. That's when basically you drop words in and it makes your readers feel a jolt, according to Hacker and Summers. You're dropping quotations into the text without warning. So you're not using what we'll call later signal phrases. You don't want to just drop quotes in because that's very confusing for readers. I encourage you to look at the examples in a pocket style manual. Page numbers are listed here. Right now would be a great time to pause this presentation and go look through those examples of how sources can be used appropriately and what the experts recommend. Here we can see an example of a poorly integrated quotation. And remember, quotations need to fit smoothly into the surrounding sentence structure. You don't just drop them, like we said, no dropped quotes. So you're going to clearly link them to the writing around the quotation, usually with a signal phrase, which we'll talk about in just a second. And we're going to do that rather than just dropping the quote abruptly into the writing. So we can see our example here. The person writes a 1970s study of what makes food appetizing, and we need to include those words, showed how color affects taste. And you can see there that the writer is actually setting up the quote, telling what the quote is going to do. So it went from being poorly integrated, where the quote didn't really seem to relate to the words around it, to, by adding those words, it shows what the quote is going to prove, what they're going to support. We can see down in the next example here that this person did what I notice a lot of students do. They just put a quote in, they drop it. And I, as a reader, I have no idea why the quote is in there. So this person then puts in, according to Lara Einer, dumpster diving has serious drawbacks as a way of life. So at least you see where the quote came from. And then, again, they add that sentence after, finding edible food is especially tricky, to put it back into the course of the paragraph. In your writing, you want to use a signal phrase. A signal phrase is a phrase, obviously, that signals to the reader that a quote, paraphrase, or other use of the source is coming. And I already gave page numbers out for where you can find all these things. This is the MLA list of signal phrases. Look at all these different verbs that we can choose from, including acknowledges, comments, compares, contends, endorses, insists, observes. You can see that these words mean different things. They all introduce the different uses of sources, though, and you use these to show your readers a little bit more about the relationship between the author and the writer and what the actual text is saying, what the quotation is doing, what they're trying to do, what they're trying to say, and how they're trying to say it. Here are some examples of how to use signal phrases in APA papers. And they encourage us to vary both the language and the placement of our signal phrases so it doesn't all seem very repetitive and monotonous. We can see some signal phrases there modeled for us in the words of Carmona, and as Yanofsky and Yanofsky have noted, happening to various medical researchers pointed out that, and you can see down the line. In APA, you're going to put the year that the article or book or whatever other type of source came out right after the author name. So that's one of the differences between APA and MLA. You're going to do that. We'll look at some other examples here down there as well, you can see. And here you can find some signal phrases modeled for MLA papers. Now, if you're looking at these two different things and saying, why are they different in MLA and APA papers? Really, this is just giving you a look at how some of the different citation styles might be. You would put your year in there as part of your signal phrase in an APA paper. You could see in the previous slide. And in this case, you do not put that here, but really a lot of the same attempts at getting those author names and their credibility in there early on to introduce the quote. And again, I'll let you look at the examples on your own here.